All right, so to continue on, the next thing they're going to talk about in here is something that's referred to as the data source configuration wizard schema file. And even though technically you've never seen anything that looks like this, all right, you should be able to read it because it's not different from the schema file we looked at earlier. All right, and when it does this, it creates this in what's called an XSD file, as you can see right there. That's XML schema definition, and it looks like this. All right, this isn't the whole thing yet, but you're going to see it. That is it in there, and what you're going to notice is it's going to look very similar to the schema picture that I showed you and that we looked at in class the other day. So the author mentions here, after you create a data source, it's displayed in the data sources window. Then you can use it to do basically what you want to do. Visual Studio, again, generates this schema file. And there's different things that you can do with that. One thing to realize, where is it? Oh, I thought they showed a picture in here. Well, that's what we're going to create in just a bit, but let's see. Well, I don't want to waste my time or your time. But what happens is when you go through here is it's going to go through, I thought they showed a picture, but in here, there'll be a picture of every table and every field that's in every table. And what it's showing you then is basically the schema setup. All right, so for lack of better words, you could kind of look at it and say it's showing you everything that is available to you. All right. So how do you use this? The easiest way is to come in and use a data grid control. Now, you're not going to see this on the screen, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up a new session of Visual Studio. Once it comes up, I'm going to change to it. All right. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to start up a brand new project. Again, I know you guys can't see this, but it's no biggie. And I'm going to choose C# Windows Forms app, just as we've done many, many times in the past. And I'm just going to call it test. I'm not even going to keep it, but I just want to show it to you once I get this thing up. All right, so it is up on my screen, so I'm going to change my data share with you so that you can see it. Am I right in assuming you can now see this? You can see the C# form right here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. When I go to my toolbox over here, yeah, the toolbox, you may or may not have ever noticed this, but I'm going to close these. These are the ones that you use most often. So these are common controls, so I'm going to close that. These are containers, so I'm going to close that. These are menus, etc. I'm going to close that. And I'm going to go down to here where it says data. All right. And the first thing they're going to talk about in here is a data grid view. I drag one of those things out and it's immediately going to ask me for a data source. I don't have one yet, but you're going to see it in a minute. But the idea with that is if I went and grabbed a data source, in fact, let's see if I can. That look familiar? This is what they just mentioned in the book. See, there was no data source. So I clicked right here and it came up with that add project data source. So I click here, I go to database, I click next, I go to data set, I click next, and it says basically what do you want? And it's showing me that there is some kind of a connection. I want a new one. So I'm clicking there. I want the Microsoft SQL server. Okay. When I click here, usually if I click here, it's going to refresh itself, but we'll see if it does or not. And no, it's not. So I'm going to click refresh here, and I'm going to try it again. Well, it's not showing them to me. Normally over here, it would show me the stuff that I've got over here, the stuff I'm going to want to use. Let's see if I cancel there. I'm going to have to cancel here. and I'm going to click here, okay, and I'm going to click View, and I'm going to try Server Explorer. And that's interesting because it's not showing the one that we did last week. All right. But what I wanted to show you is this. I can still show you a bit of it. So you come in here. There is no data source, so you choose one. In fact, let's go backwards. Okay. Try that again. Well, I just hosed this thing up. I'm going to exit and try it again. You won't see it for a second. I'm going to bring it back up. I think it's important enough to try to show you what's going on and show you it without screwing it up. All right, I'm just going to start a new project because I kind of hosed that one up a little bit. All right. So again, when I come in here and I go to my toolbox and I come in and I bring in, as I just showed you, a data grid view. The system doesn't know what I'm trying to hook up, what's there, etc. So it says you don't have a data source. And I click there to choose a data source. Again, 99 times out of 100, I'm going to choose database. Data set, only thing that's there. It does walk you through here. It gives you names and stuff. And when I click for a new connection and I click here, for some reason it's not showing me the different things I have in here. All right, normally it would. I don't know what's going on here. But usually if you click refresh like this, it'll go through the refresh process. And then when you click here, it'll show you whatever databases you have available. All right, it's not showing really much of anything here. Let's try that with my server name. Now let's try refresh. All right, now I click here, boom. All right. And the one that we did, of course I don't, there's sales orders. I don't know, we did sales orders DB, but you get the idea hopefully. So I've got their sales orders. I can click test, it should beep. All right. It says, yeah, don't worry about that. It succeeded. I go on, I click OK. All right, and I want it to show my data string, so I'm going to check this. There's my data string. I'm going to copy that to the clipboard. I'm going to click next again. You're not going to get these install missing packages. Don't worry about that. But it will eventually come up and it will show at the end. I don't know what's going on with this, but it will eventually come up and it will show the different tables I have available in here. That's what I was hoping to do, but for whatever reason, it doesn't like what I'm trying to do here. All right, I'm gonna stop this. What I tried to show you though, and I didn't do a great job of it, but what I was trying to show you in here was that we will walk through these steps in just a couple minutes. When you put in a data grid view, it looks like this. All right, by default, it'll give you every field that you asked it to give in here. All right. You've got your choice. You can go in here then and you can click on the field itself and right mouse click if you wanted, for example, as an example, we don't have it here, but let's say I had product ID. I would probably put product ID in as a label because if you remember, a label is read only. So I wouldn't be able to change it. All right. I could, if I want something to be a drop down, I can change that to a drop down or a text box or whatever. Also, if you notice, when you start doing this, it creates a bunch of controls for you down here. And they're explained down here. I do want to tell you, it's going to sound almost stupid, but these controls are not part of your form, technically. They're in this area down here, and they are actually called invisible controls. Meaning if I grabbed one of these, clicked on it, held down and dragged it up here, it wouldn't stay. It would immediately fall back here. But you'll see there is a data set, and as it says, it provides access to all the tables, views, etc. for the project. All right. There's a binding source, which identifies the data source of the controls they're bound to. All right. So what are we trying to do with this particular thing we're working on? There is an adapter. All right. And as it says, it provides the commands used to read and write data to and from the table in the database. So it is the conduit. It is what allows the program to communicate with the database and the database to communicate with the program. All right. There's a table adapter manager, which, as it says, it provides for writing data in related tables while maintaining referential integrity. Again, what that's saying is if I've got a customers and an orders table, I'm not going to allow you to remove a customer if that customer has outstanding orders for which they have not yet paid. Okay. And finally, there's a product binding navigator. All right. And as it says, it defines the toolbar that can be used to add, delete, etc. What does that mean? That means when you look up here and you run this, and ideally when we try this in a few minutes, it's going to work for us as well, that when we run ours, rather than it coming up like this, it's going to show you all the fields in the table. When it does that, you can click on any one of the fields, make changes, and click the save button, and it should save it. If you click on any field in any record and you click the X, it should delete that record. If you click on the plus sign, it should go down to the bottom and allow you to insert a new record. Plus, it'll allow you to iterate your way through the records. So if you've got 100, it may show 10 on the screen. Then you can click on here, and you can, you go through them one at a time, or you can go to the end by going here. You can go back a record from here and to the beginning of the records here. Now, do I expect you to remember that? No, but I'm just showing it to you. So the first application that they have in here, let's look at this. In fact, I'd like to go through the rest of the chapter and then come back and see if we can do this. All right. So it says at this point, the data grid view control provides all the functionality that you need to maintain the data in the products table. All right. Now it looks a little bit funky in that if you look at unit price, for example, it's like, what is that? You can format that so it has 2 decimal places. And they even show you how to do that in here. It's no big thing. The point is, what I want you to understand is if you look on the screen right now, and you can also make this wider if you need it to be bigger, so we could drag that out because this is kind of getting truncated. All right. But this code gets created for you. That code that you see right there that says this.products.table.adapter.fill says to go out and grab whatever fields we've asked for, grab them and select this field, and this field. In our case, it's as though we typed in select product code, comma, description, comma, unit price from products, and then it just takes it and it puts it right in here. So that's the code that does all that. All right. So again, you might say, okay, I even kind of get that. Why didn't we just do it like this last week? We could have, but the way that I showed it to you, hopefully what you kind of are understanding is that's the code that runs in the background. The code that you wrote is basically what runs in the background to make this happen. All right. And here's the, this will save it for you. Notice this dot validate, this line right here. All right. Am I right in assuming you're seeing what I'm showing you on the screen here? I've got the right share up. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. This dot validate makes sure, for example, if I come in here and I remove a unit price, so there's nothing there, or I type in hello, this dot validate is going to fail right there. It's not going to allow me to put bad data into the system. All right. But when I go through all this, if the validate works, it says, okay, I'm done editing, update the table for me. So this is a way that you can basically create the equivalent of a relational database management system. Again, we do this through a bunch of different data connections, but we could bring up, instead of the way that we did it, we could have had just 5, we could have set it up with 5 different forms, and each form would have been hooked up to the database, and each form would have brought up the table in question, all right, from sales orders that we were working on. So as it says here, Visual Studio automatically generates this code for us, all right? And I'm not going to read that because that's what I just told you, all right? So you can do things, you can sort. So if you want to, right now, I think it gets sorted automatically by the field right here, product code. But if you want it, if you click on product code again, it sorts it in reverse order. If you click on description, it'll sort it by description. If you click on price, it'll sort it by price. If you click on price again, and it'll sort it in price in descending order. And that's what the author is saying there. So it'll do a lot of that work for you, for lack of better words. All right. So how to change the controls associated with a data source. All right. This is what I said before. So notice you can highlight any of these. You can go and right mouse click on it and choose details and notice what comes up. These are the different ways you can set this up. And they actually give you a good example here, because what are we doing? We want state to be a combo box. So when this comes up on here, that's exactly what it'll be. All right. So as it says, by default, a data table is associated with a data grid view. To change this so that each column is in a separate control, you select the details option. So what you're saying is, rather than having it come up and look the way that we just had it look here, we can go in and make changes if we want to do so to customize it. All right. Then it's going to look like this. Hopefully you notice when you take a look at it how different it looks. This looks more, at least, like what we did. All right. And even though it doesn't show it here, if we do go down and change state to a drop down, when you run it, this will be a drop down. The rest of these by default, the rest of these come in there as text boxes. Not only that, and it's not a big thing, but just so you know, if I wanted city, state, zip together, I could take and just, again, call this city, state, zip, remove these 2 labels, keep this label here, move that one next to it, move that one next to that. Again, kind of like the way that I did it when we were working on it. All right. Now, a couple things that are in here. And again, you probably won't remember these, but I want you to hear the terminology. It says to display the value of a column in the text box, Visual Studio uses the text property that's called data bindings. We're doing a simple data binding right there when we're using text boxes. If we start to use drop downs and list boxes, etc., all right, then we're using more complex type of data binding. All right. So this application, notice the customer maintenance application that uses these controls. So what is this? This is pretty much your customer table. So now when you come in, you'll notice right away, as I mentioned, they set up the customer ID as a label. You can remove the record, but you cannot change the value of your primary field. And again, the reason that it's done like that is the system is trying to, for lack of better words, protect you from yourself. But you can come in here and change, I think this is the, customer. So you can change the customer name, the customer address, the customer city, state, or zip. And good, bad, or indifferent, you may or may not remember this, but text field, text field, text field, text field, text field. We went in and we put in, remember, if you remember, I put in that check that where we went through the states array, and we said if it wasn't in there, don't accept it. I don't think this one has that. So if I put in there, for example, CF, what is that? That's the state of confusion. That's a little joke between me and a different instructor. But if I put CF in there, the system would probably take it. And if I put in something that wasn't set up correctly in there, as long as it was 15 or less characters, the system could take it. So what I tried to show you when we went in and we put in some of our own checks and balances for things like state name, for things like patterns that we had in here for a zip code, and even though they don't have a phone number in here, we did, to show you that typically, you know, what you get from the system like this is it writes a couple lines of code for you. All right, that's it. But it doesn't do any checking by default. To my knowledge, there is not a data type that exists in SQL Server that's called phone number. There is not a data type that exists in SQL that's called zip code, or one that's called state. So the bottom line is, you're kind of, if you do it like this, you're at the mercy of thinking that the person who puts the information in originally, or anybody who changes it, knows what the heck they're doing. If we don't want to give them that, let's say the only thing we want them to be able to change is the name of the company, then we could take all of these and make them labels as well. The problem is, what if the company moves? All right. And it moves from Birmingham, Alabama to Wentzville, Missouri. You'd want to give them then the ability to change the address, the city, state, and zip. But all I'm trying to show you is we put so much more into ours than they have right here. That's the disadvantage, because we had to do more work. The advantage is we had more control because we took control over what was happening. All right. So what do you do if you do get errors? One thing to remember up here when you look, I mentioned this to you earlier, don't worry about ODBC or OLE, just the SQL exceptions. So as it says, those are errors that are thrown if there's some kind of an error associated with an SQL Server database. All right, so here's things that we can check for. Number, an error number that defines the type of error that you have. Message, typically at a minimum, you're going to write message because that's going to give it to you. And I will tell you, maybe you believe it, maybe you don't, but boy, a lot of times when I write code, I get a ton of errors when I first start. And when I was working on the thing that we did last week, I was always, stuff just wasn't working, and I had ex.message all over the place. So this says, try to do this. If it fails, since we're trying an SQL operation, we should get an SQL exception. So if that happens, just write database error, give me the number, all right, and give me the message. Give me the type of error, all right, and put that to string. The key things, though, in here are the number and the message. Why? They're the key things because I can Google those. What you're going to find as you go down your programmatic career is a lot of times you're going to write code that you're sure works, and guess what? It doesn't. So what happens is you're going to get an error, sometimes an error number and a message, sometimes just a number, sometimes just a message. And then you Google that. All right, because you're not the first person in the world. I can't imagine any error that comes up that you or me are going to get that the first, we're the first ones that ever got that error. It's just not going to happen. All right, so that's again explained down here a little bit more detail. How to handle ADO.NET errors. Those pretty much are errors, at least sometimes they're over and above your control. Not always. But like a concurrency exception. What does that mean? That means, again, you've got two different people who are trying to use the same database and the same table at the same time. All right, that's a concurrency violation. Okay, and again, just imagine this. I know we're living in a weird world right now, but imagine that you wanted, that everything is, quote, back to normal, unquote, and you want to go and you want to see a Blues game. All right, and the Blues game is next week, so you go on to StubHub.com and you try to get a ticket. Usually what happens in there is they show you all the tickets that are available, and they give you like about somewhere between 45 seconds and a minute 45. You can choose any available ticket. And if somebody else comes in during that time, usually they're frozen out because you never know what ticket I'm going to want to buy. All right. So you want to make sure that that's trying to make sure there's no concurrency exception. In that case, they wouldn't want to give me a ticket and somebody else a ticket to the same seat. Okay. You can have data exceptions, which, as it says, are general exceptions. Constraint exceptions, well, those are things you could have. All right. A constraint, for instance, if we had a thing in there where we were putting in grade point average, and we said it had to be between 0.0 and 4.0, and you put a 10 in there, that'd be a constraint exception. All right. A no null allowed exception. All right. You might have certain fields, like you may have a field where you ask a user to enter in their social security number or their employee number. Even though it's not a primary key, it's mandatory. And if they leave it blank, it would throw one of those exceptions. And you'll notice again with all these, they're done inside of try-catch blocks. All right. The good news with try-catch blocks is you try something. If it fails and you know the different types of errors that it can fail with, you're in total control over what you do here. You could give a message box, but then you could allow it to go on. For instance, what if I had an application that I wrote for Rankin Technical College, and it asked for the state, and you had to put something in, and you left yours blank? Then I could say, you know what? Just fill it in with Missouri. All right, or something like that. All right. So as it says, these ADO.NET exceptions occur on any ADO.NET type of object. All right. In most cases, it'll be pretty obvious what's happened. But again, you're in charge by default. If you don't handle the error when it comes up, if you don't handle it, then by default the system will handle it. And typically what the system does is it keeps going up and up what's called the call stack, looking for a way to handle it. And if nothing is provided, typically it gets to the top of the call stack and it says, I don't know what to do. So the program just blows up. All right. So they say that there is some smarts, or are some smarts built into the data grid view itself to try to protect you from yourself. All right. So those kind of data errors would again be something like I mentioned before. If you had a field that was mandatory and you left it off, or a field that was numeric that you put a non-numeric value in, type of thing. So again, you can check for that. All right, this is what I want to see. The data set designer. There it is. All right, that's an example of the data set designer. In this case, we have only the customers table here, but you can bring up the data set designer and you can add tables to it. So in other words, if I wanted to take customers and join it with another table, I can do that. I can bring other tables out onto this. And if you notice here, it's got fill and get data. Don't ever monkey with those. Those are the ones that the system builds for you, those 2 or 3 or 4 lines of code I showed you earlier. But you can come in here and do all sorts of stuff, such as, all right, you can come in and you can say, you can say as an example that when you come in here, all right, that you do want the zip code to be number, or number, dash, number. So you can come in here and actually come in and use some of the properties to actually enforce things like regular expression handling. All right. When you do that, you bring up what's called the query builder. Now, believe it or not, what is shown right here makes so much sense. But when you first see it, it doesn't. This right here, as they say, it's the diagram pane. All right. You can come in here. Right now, we've got just the customers table. You should be able to tell from looking at this that since I've got these fields checked here, all right, customer ID, name, address, city, okay, and we do have state and zip code also, you just can't see them. But whatever you check here writes the query in here in the SQL pane. If you decide that when you come in here, you want to do something special, like as it says, put things in ascending or descending order, you can even change around different things in here, but you want to add filtering. You come in the grid pane to do that. Then in the SQL pane, it's the query that it writes from whatever you checked up on top. And then on the bottom, that's your results. You can make any of these bigger or smaller by just clicking right here and dragging up, etc., because there's more than one record. It's just one of 696. So you set up everything, you click execute query, and you get the results in here. It's pretty cool. And actually, the first database system that I learned when I went back into academia here was Access. And when you work with Access, you do almost everything just like this. All right, you write virtually no code. You just use this. You use a query builder. So that's what they're mentioning in here. I don't think I missed anything. How to preview data for a query. All right, you can set it up. Okay, and this is what I was going to set up for you guys, was come in here and have a data grid view. Come in here and have the equivalent of a text box where you can put your own information in. All right. But I believe what they're doing in here is it's saying, okay, we've got 6 columns, we've got 696 rows, but you can set it up with a query pane or preview pane that if I only want to see one record, I can have it show in there. All right. This that you see right here, this is more along the lines of what we'll go over Wednesday and Thursday next week. These @ signs that you see in here mean that what I want to be able to do is at runtime, when the system is actually, the program is running, I want to be able to select whatever customer I want. And based on the customer that I select, all right, it's going to run this query. @name will be the name of the row that I selected. @address, the address in the row that I selected, etc. And if I want to do that, typically too, notice what I'm going to do. This is very similar to what I did in the one we worked on last week. But what we did was we said customer ID is equal to whatever we put into that text box. Name is whatever we put into that text box, etc. And I did that to try to show you, kind of what's happening under the hood, so to speak. And that's it. All right. So it did give me my second one in here, telling me now I've got, again, 5 minutes left. Let's take our first real break. It is 9:20. All right, let's come back, please, at 9:40, and we're going to look at the 2 applications that are in the chapter. See if we can get them to work. All right, just so you have some kind of an idea of what's going on. All right, so I'll see you back here at 9:40, please.